Hello, my name is Thomas. Welcome to British Culture. Albion Never Dies. Today, I'm looking at The Railway Children, the book, the TV show, the film, and the real railway. And of course, that is the answer to the quiz question which came last week. Last week I gave lots and lots of clues as to what it might be, and asked people to email me or to Instagram me and let me know what they thought from the, I think, fairly subtle clues I gave. And of course the prize was an A is for Albion mug, which is from my Redbubble shop. 7 people entered. What a good number. 007 people entered. Matthew Spencer was the first, a primary school teacher in Korea, who said that as a school teacher he should be familiar with this great children's story. On Instagram, Bond Up North messaged me and said, purely as it's a children's book, and if you have visited locations, I'm guessing it's local. Yes, we're both based in Yorkshire. He guessed The Railway Children. Novice Artisan on Instagram quite enjoyed my description of the story, a London family dealing with the North. Check out his Instagram for all kinds of interesting crafting. Dan Howes messaged me, guessing the answer correctly. Lou Ecker subscribe to the podcast and the newsletter as well, and we've corresponded quite a bit. He correctly identified that this is all about the Railway Children. Marcus also subscribed to the newsletter. I'll talk a bit more about him later. And Mike Hoare, who said, I hope you feel better soon, and gave the correct answer, because of course I have been down with a cold, so I hope my voice is sounding loud and clear, and I'm certainly feeling a lot better than I was. So each of the entrants, I gave a number, the number of the order in which they messaged me. So Matthew Spencer being number 1, Bond Up North being number 2, Novice Artisan being number 3, Dan Howes 4, Lou Ecker 5, Marcus 6, Mike Hoare 7, and then I put it into a random number generator, and it was number 1 who won. So congratulations, Matthew, you were number 1, and you are number 1. A is for Albion mug will be winging its way to you in Korea very, very soon. We are focused on British culture here, but we are also worldwide. And now it's time to be on with the show, on with the show. I'll be talking about The Railway Children first. I'll be talking about the author of the original book, Edith Nesbit. I'll be talking about the Dreyfus Affair, which is obliquely referenced in the book. I'll talk about the TV show, the film, and of course, the railway itself, which is the real star of the show. So, as often, it's a famous British person. What better place to go to than the Encyclopedia Britannica? E. Nesbit, in full, Edith Nesbit, and it gives the vital details. Born August 15th, 1858 in London, and died May 4th, 1924 in New Romney in Kent. British children's author, novelist, and poet. It gives a brief outline of her. Nesbit spent her childhood in France and Germany, and later led an ordinary country life in Kent, which provided scenes for her books. She was interested in socialism and was one of the founders of the association known as the Fellowship of New Life, out of which grew the Fabian Society. Nesbit began writing fiction for children in the early 1890s, and she eventually produced more than 60 books for juveniles, as well as some less successful novels and collections of poetry for adults. Her children's books are marked by vivid characterizations, ingenious plots, and an easy, humorous narrative style. She wrote both tales of fantasy or magic, in which children in everyday circumstances are confronted with an extraordinary character or event, and naturalistic comedies of juvenile behaviour or childish misadventure. Lots to unpack there, especially the poetry and a couple of the children's stories and her, Labour Party connections as slowly evolved out of the various organisations she was part of. I thought I'd first of all look at what Encyclopedia Britannica called the less successful novels and collection of poetry, and I've been going through, and this is a poem from Nesbit that I particularly liked. The South is a dream of flowers, with a jewel for sky and sea, rose crowns for the dancing hours, gold fruits upon every tree. But cold from the north the wind blows forth, that blows my love to me. The stars in the south are gold, like lamps between sky and sea. The flowers that the forests hold, like stars between tree and tree. But little and white, is the pale moon's light that lights my love to me. In the south the orange grove makes dusk by the dusky sea. White palaces wrought for love, white gleam between tree and tree, but under bare boughs is the little house, warm lit for my love and me. In fact, quite a lot of her poetry is rather romantic. Makes you wonder about her personal life just a little bit. Of course, it's her children's stories that are most popular. 5 Children and It is probably her children's story I was most familiar with, published in 1902 and repeatedly adapted and readapted, I think most memorably by the BBC in 1991, which was broadcast in the US under the name The Sand Fairy, and more recently was adapted in 2004. I think first of all, among all the children's stories, I'll have a look at 5 Children and It. As it has movie versions, I thought I'd take a leaf from Taylor's with Love's book and have a look on the various online websites. I looked at Rotten Tomatoes, where the 2004 was okay rated and had this nice little synopsis. 5 Children and It. When their father goes off to war, a group of children that includes the mischievous Robert and Cyril stay with their uncle as a greenhouse on his property. There they discover It, a creature they recognise from bedtime stories as being a sand fairy. It can grant wishes, but as the children and their cousin Horan soon find out, the more outlandish their desire, the greater the chance for disaster to result. As I say, I'm looking at the 2004 movie version on Rotten Tomatoes, and this is what the professional critics say. This is one I've just picked out for my own amusement. 5 posh World War sprogs are dispatched to Uncle Kenneth Branagh's Gothic pile in a Devon nook. It's a ghastly film. Okay, clearly Tosca isn't for everyone. Somebody else, another professional critic, said its eccentric charms and light humour will certainly win over anyone looking for a brisk family adventure. Well, perhaps that first critic wasn't looking for a brisk family adventure. The audience had, I thought, the most interesting review, not as good as I remember the TV series being, but it's a fun movie and I'm sure kids would like it. I was curious to find if I could find that BBC TV show. After all, it's, before the digital age, and, not every VHS tape became a DVD, and not every DVD becomes a streaming service, and so on. It becomes available on a streaming service. But I had a look on Amazon, and Amazon does indeed have it available for streaming, and I quite liked one review, which it looked, I guess it's just a viewer, not a professional reviewer, but I thought it was very well written, and it has the headline, "Be careful what you wish for, you might actually get it." It's by Green Knight on Amazon. And the children do every time, with consequences that are by turns funny, silly, dramatic, and all those adventuresome things that a child's imagination is full of, even today. The story is well known, the book is a classic after all, and the beauty of E. Nesbit's writing is that she creates completely believable characters, both in what they do and in what they say. Her dialogue is spot on and doesn't date. It avoids the more self-conscious, jolly hockey sticks of later writers, Angela Brazil, Enid Blyton et al., and lets her children bicker and sulk if they want to. There was never a hint of moralising or finger-wagging in Nesbit's work. Okay, so be careful what you wish for in case you actually get it. That's not moralising. It's sound common sense. These 6 episodes are a little gem of children's television. Good fun and warm-hearted, with some rather lovely special effects. The programme was made at a time when the BBC was learning how to keep up with the movies within its own budgetary restrictions, and it works beautifully. The Sarmeed, or Sand Fairy to you, who is the It of the title, is a lovely creation, not a trace of the soulless CGI that now haunts just about everything. This is a beautifully designed and made bona fide puppet with nicely moving bits and pieces and a range of facial expressions that say quite a lot for the team that brought it to life with obvious affection and humour. Compare this quietly grumpy creature with its soft latex wrinkles to the ghastly all-singing, all-dancing electronic thing concocted a few years later, 2004, for the cinema, and the BBC version wins hands down. It's partly the writing, whoever chose the late Helen Cresswell to dramatise the book for television is a genius, and partly the playing, but here, It has the perfect balance of being slightly academic, but always sympathetic and amusing, without ever losing dignity or resorting to slapstick. So there we go, 5 Children and It. Often these stories by Nesbit are, I don't know, they show such happy little families, so I couldn't help look at some of the biographies you can find online. The Guardian had a nice review of a biography, so I thought I'd go through that and have a little look at what was going on in that writer's life. From The Guardian. In 1880, the 21-year-old Edith married Bland, then a bank clerk. He was tall and athletic, powerful seeming. The description left by George Bernard Shaw, a close friend of the couple during their early marriage, makes Bland sound like a bully. Nevertheless, he was popular with women. He had already impregnated one fiancée by the time they met. Nesbit herself was 7 months pregnant when they married. Their son Paul was born that summer. 2 more children, Iris and Fabian, followed. Bland was never good with money. Nesbit supported the family by writing and by decorating greetings cards. It seems little surprise that her novels tend to feature hard-working mothers battling in the background to keep the family afloat. Indeed, in The Railway Children, the mother is, of course, writing short stories to sell, to support the family. From The Guardian, the household was apparently always embroiled in scenes. It's hard to tell what was for show and what was suffering. Shortly after Iris's birth, Nesbit discovered that Bland's relationship with his previous fiancée was still going on. On his nights away from home, Nesbit's friend, Alice Hoatson, kept her company. When a devastated Nesbit suffered a stillbirth, it was Hoatson who had to praise the dead baby from her arms. Before long, she had moved in, permanently. They told people she had joined them because she was seriously ill. In fact, she was heavily pregnant. Nesbit agreed to raise the child, a girl named Rosamond, as her own. It is unclear when she discovered that Bland was the baby's father. Rosamond would later claim that Nesbit only found out 6 months after the birth, and would have thrown the pair out if Bland hadn't threatened to leave with them. Others assumed that Nesbit had always known, and may even have engineered the affair to get her husband away from a lover she disliked. She had her own intense romantic friendships, Shaw being one of them, yet Fitzsimmons, the biography, concludes that these were probably platonic. Okay, right. So she does a wonderful, wonderful job of creating all these wonderful, happy families in her stories that are still quite engaging. They're not boring, but my goodness, there seems to be a lot of drama going on in her own life. Still, let's carry on with that brief bio. Vibrantly attractive and adored by her many protégés and readers, she was what they called in those days advanced. A committed socialist, she and her husband, Hubert Blant, were among the earliest members of the Fabian Society, who wore free-flowing clothes, gave charitably and wrote ferociously against poverty, and let her children play barefoot in the garden. Her home at Well Hall in Eltham was a lively hub for young writers, artists, and Fabians, a place H.G. Wells recalled, to which one rushed down from town at the weekend to snatch one's bed before anyone else got it. She was generous with her time, her money, and her husband. It's that connection with early socialism, the international outlook and community, that leads on to the Dreyfus Affair. I mentioned it in the last episode when I was having a competition to guess what this topic would be. Marcus, who I mentioned earlier, he emailed me mentioning that the Dreyfus Affair was covered in the book An Officer and a Spy by Robert Harris. Several of Harris's books have been adapted to film, most recently The Ghostwriter in 2010, starring Pierce Brosnan and Ewan McGregor. It's a pretty good film. For the book An Officer and a Spy, the back cover, I think, summarises the story of the Dreyfus Affair quite well. An intelligence agency gone rogue, justice corrupted in the name of national security, a newspaper witch hunt of a persecuted minority, the age-old instinct of those in power to cover up their crimes. Paris, January 1895. 20,000 spectators are baying death to the Jew as Captain Alfred Dreyfus is denounced as a spy. Sentenced to a lifetime in solitary confinement on Devil's Island, his case seems closed forever. Newly promoted to the head of the statistical selection, the shadowy intelligence unit that has tracked down Dreyfus, Officer George Picquart begins to suspect there is something rotten at its heart. Despite official warnings, Picquart continues to pursue the truth until he realizes he has more in common with Dreyfus than he could ever have imagined. the most remarkable thing about this is, of course, the fact that it is based on a true story. Dreyfus was a real man, accused by the French military of being a traitor, and convicted of being a traitor. But when his case was reviewed, taken up by novelists, by the newspapers, and by many interested parties, and then resisted by other institutionally invested parties, it became not only a national affair, but an international affair, followed by people in the newspapers day by day in the UK, even with a transatlantic telegraph then, in the USA day to day. I've been going through quite a few YouTube videos on this recently. It's become, a bit of a rabbit hole. So I'm going to say this is my recommended rabbit hole for this episode. You can, of course, enjoy it for yourself, delving into the case and finding your own take, because even in a recent French political election, there was a discussion all about it. Anyway, perhaps now, more than 15 minutes into the podcast, perhaps now it is time for me to actually read a little section from The Railway Children. It's a wonderful, wonderful Edwardian novel, and I think now is a good time for me to read a little section. This first section describes the railway children themselves before they became railway children. There were 3 of them. Roberta was the eldest. Of course, mothers never have favourites. But if their mother had a favourite, it might have been Roberta. Next came Peter, who wished to be an engineer when he grew up, and the youngest was Phyllis, who meant extremely well. Mother did not spend all her time in paying dull calls to dull ladies and sitting dully at home, waiting for dull ladies to pay calls to her. She was almost always there, ready to play with the children and read to them and help them do their home lessons. Besides this, she used to write stories for them while they were at school and read them aloud after tea, and she always made up funny pieces of poetry for their birthdays and for other great occasions, such as the christening of the new kittens, or the refurnishing of the doll's house, or the time when they were getting over the mumps. These 3 lucky children always had everything they needed. Pretty clothes, good fires, a lovely nursery with a heap of toys, and Mother Goose wallpaper. They had a kind and merry nursemaid, and a dog who was called James, and who was their very own. They also had a father who was just perfect. Never cross, never unjust, and always ready for a game. At least, if at any time he was not ready, he always had an excellent reason for it, and he explained the reason to the children so interestingly and funnily that they felt sure he couldn't help himself. You will think that they ought to have been very happy, and so they were. But they did not know how happy till the pretty life in the Red Villa was over and done with, and they had to lead a very different life indeed. The dreadful change came quite suddenly. Peter had a birthday, his 10th. Among his other presents was a model engine, more perfect than you could ever have dreamed of. The other presents were full of charm, but the engine was fuller of charm than any of the others were. Its charm lasted in its full perfection for exactly 3 days. Then, owing either to Peter's inexperience or Phyllis's good intentions, which had been rather pressing, or to some other cause, the engine suddenly went off with a bang. James was so frightened that he went out and did not come back all day. All the Noah's Ark people who were in the tender were broken to bits, but nothing else was heard except the poor little engine and the feelings of Peter. The others said he cried over it, but of course boys of 10 do not cry, however terrible the tragedies may be which darken their lot. He said that his eyes were red because he had a cold. This turned out to be true, although Peter did not know it when he said it. The next day he had to go to bed and stay there. Mother began to be afraid that he might be sickening for measles, when he suddenly sat up in bed and said, "I hate gruel, I hate barley water, I hate bread and milk, I want to get up and have something real to eat." "What would you like?" Mother asked. "A pigeon pie," said Peter eagerly, "a large pigeon pie, a very large one." So, Mother asked the cook to make a large pigeon pie. The pie was made, and when the pie was made, it was cooked, and when it was cooked, Peter ate some of it. After that, his cold was better. Mother made a piece of poetry to amuse him while the pie was being made. It began by saying what an unfortunate but worthy boy Peter was. Then it went on. He had an engine that he loved with all his heart and soul, and if he had a wish on earth, it was to keep it whole. One day, my friends, prepare your minds, and coming to the worst, quite suddenly the screw went mad, and the boiler burst. With a gloomy face, he picked it up and took it to his mother, even though he could not suppose that she could make another. For those who perished on the line he did not seem to care, the engine being more to him than all the people there. And now you see the reason why our Peter has been ill. He soothes his soul with pigeon pie, his gnawing grief to kill. He wraps himself in blankets warm and sleeps in bed till late, determined thus to overcome his miserable fate. And if his eyes are rather red, his cold must just excuse it. Offer him pie, you may be sure, he never will refuse it. Father had been away in the country for 3 or 4 days. All Peter's hopes for the curing of his afflicted engine were now fixed on his father, for father was most wonderfully clever with his fingers. He could mend all sorts of things. He had often acted as a veterinary surgeon to the wooden rocking horse. Once he had saved its life when all human aid was despaired of, and the poor creature was given up for lost. And even the carpenter said he didn't see his way to do anything, and it was father who mended the doll's cradle when no one else could, and with a little glue and some bits of wood and a penknife, he made all the Noah's Ark beasts as strong on their pins as ever they were, if not stronger. Peter, with heroic unselfishness, did not say anything about his engine till after father had had his dinner, and after-dinner cigar. The unselfishness was mother's idea, but it was Peter who carried it out, and needed a good deal of patience too. At last, mother said to father, "Now, dear, if you're quite rested and quite comfy, we want to tell you about the great railway accident, and ask your advice." "All right," said father, "fire away." So then Peter told the sad tale and fetched what was left of the engine. Said father, when he had looked at the engine over very carefully. The children held their breaths. "Is there no hope?" said Peter, in a low, unsteady voice. "Hope? Rather tons of it," said father cheerfully, "but it'll want something beside hope. A bit of brazing, say, or some solder, a new valve. I think we'd better keep it for a rainy day. In other words, I'll give up Saturday afternoon to it, and you can all help me." "Can girls help mend engines?" Peter asked doubtfully. "Of course they can. Girls are just as clever as boys, and don't you forget it. How would you like to be an engine driver, Phil?" "My face would always be dirty, wouldn't it?" said Phyllis in unenthusiastic tones. "I expect I should break something." "I should just love it," said Roberta. "Do you think I could when I'm grown up, Daddy? Or even a stoker?" "You mean a fireman," said Daddy, pulling and twisting at the engine. "Well, if you still wish it when you've grown up, we'll see about making you a firewoman. I remember when I was a boy." Just then there was a knock on the front door. "Who on earth?" said father. "An Englishman's house is his castle, of course. I do wish they built semi-detached villas with moats and drawbridges." Ruth, she was the parlour-maid and had red hair, came in and said the 2 gentlemen wished to see the master. "I've shown them into the library, sir," she said. "Oh, I expect it's subscription to the vicar's testimonial," said mother. "Or else it's the choir holiday fund. Get rid of them quickly, dear. It does break up in the evening so, and it's nearly the children's bedtime." But father did not seem to be able to get rid of the gentleman at all quickly. "I wish we had a moat and drawbridge," said Roberta. "Then, when we didn't want people, we could just pull up the drawbridge, and no one else could get in. I expect father will have quite forgotten about when he was a boy if they stay much longer." Mother tried to make the time pass by telling them a new fairy story about a princess with green eyes, but it was difficult, because they could hear the voices of father and the gentleman at the library, and father's voice sounded louder and different to the voice he generally used to people when they came about testimonials and holiday funds. Then the library bell rang, and everyone breathed a heavy sigh of relief. "They're going now," said Phyllis. "He's rung to have them shown out." But instead of showing anybody out, Ruth showed herself in. She looked queer, the children thought. "Please, she said, the master wants you to step into the study. He looks like the dead, Mum. I think he's had bad news. You'd better prepare yourself for the worst." Well, I think that's as much of the story as I should read out. Of course, you can find the story on Kindle and on all good bookshops. And of course, there is the TV show and the movie, and there is stage productions and all sorts. It is a wonderful story. Well, again, I went off to Amazon to have a look at some reviews of the original 1968 television version. I looked at the best and the worst. The best from the 1-star reviews and the best from the 5-star reviews of the adaptations. The best 1-star review says, I ordered 2 copies of this DVD for my grandchildren, believing it to be the colour film with Jenny Agutter. It does have Jenny Agutter, but it's the earlier black and white BBC serial. I think this is sharp practice and not what I wanted to buy. Okay, so, right actress, wrong thing. And yes, the old TV version was, of course, black and white. From the 5-star reviews, this is a wonderful story and all versions are worth seeing. I remember watching this black and white TV version in the 60s and I'm amazed at how some parts of it came back to me so vividly, including the very charming performance by Gillian Bailey as Phyllis, who for me shines in this version, as well as Gordon Gostelow, who is very good as Perks. The first few minutes seem a bit wooden, but it picks up quickly, and once it adjusted to it, I found it most enjoyable. It's always a good film that means you have to adjust to it. Anyway, she continues, the 1970 and 2000 film versions are also must-sees, and I find it difficult to say which I like better. Jenny Agutter, who has been in all versions either as Bobby or in 2000 as her mother, has made the story her own, and for me the 1970 film is her most touching performance. Like many, I can't watch this story without crying at the end, no matter how many times I see it. Yes, almost every single review of any other version cycles back at some point to the 1970 film. It is the iconic version of it. It can be adapted any number of times, but even with the original being so far away, a new version, The Railway Children Returns, came out this year, and when, funnily enough, Jenny Agutter had to be in it, as I think this time a grandmother, she was interviewed on Breakfast TV. The interviewer had very few questions about the new movie and simply wanted to talk about the 1970 movie. It is iconic. So you can make as many versions as you like of this story. It's always going to be the 1970 version. And indeed, I saw it very, very recently, and was actually surprised how good it was. I mean, I saw it as a child, but watching it as an adult, these things are always a little bit different. And to be honest, I think it was better as an adult than I remember it being as a child. And of course, that may have had an element of the fact that I've been to the locations very, very recently, because it was all filmed in the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, which is in West Yorkshire. Therefore, it's easy access for me. I popped along and happened to wander around. I visited the locations before I watched the film, so I wasn't fully aware of what would be in the film and what wouldn't. It just happened to be that they use, the most beautiful sections, I think. Keighley and Worth is the name of this railway, and the station is Oakworth, which often TV productions will change the name, or the filming location. In the 1970 film, they keep it. Oakworth is the real station. And what is it? The KWVR railway. It's a unique 5-mile branch line, again in the heart of West Yorkshire, running heritage steam and diesel trains from the industrial landscape of Keighley to the stunning Bronte country of Oxenhope. Here we have one classic British writer connecting with a whole family of classic British writers. From the website of the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway, you can either pre-book or turn up and buy your selected railway station. You don't need to pre-book, but if you do book a day rover 3 days in advance, you can save 15%. And to quote them exactly, everyone loves a good old Yorkshire bargain. I started to look at their website because I really wanted some of the history of the line. It's got about 150 years worth of history there. The branch out of Keighley climbs up the valley, serving several small Pennine villages along the way. It is very, very beautiful, going from fairly low-lying land up into the hills. At Oakworth, the railway leaves the valley of the River Worth and enters the valley of Bridge House Beck, wherein lie Haworth, Bronte country, and the line's terminus at Oxenhope. There's Oxworth and Oxenhope. The line opened in 1867, funded predominantly by local wealthy mill owners. Within a very short time, the railway became part of the Midland Railway, until in 1923, at the grouping, it was absorbed into the new London, Midland and Scottish Railway. Upon nationalisation in 1948, the line became part of British Railways, and with its fortune declining, with the rise of competition from the roads, the branch closed in 1962. But then, a preservation society was formed which created a company to buy the line outright and lease access to Keighley station and operate a regular public service there. After years of volunteer struggle, the line reopened to passenger traffic in June 1968. The wonderful thing is that Keighley is a modern station but has this platform for the steam trains, so you can get to it very, very easily and just transfer to a steam train, which I think is very, very cool. Something that's often left out whenever you read about the railway children is the fact that on this line you've got Damon's, which is the smallest operating passenger station in the UK. It's not easily accessible by road, but it's well worth the trouble. You go along to Keighley, switch the steam train, go along the steam train, and you have to ask the staff to stop at Damon's. They say it's the smallest operating passenger station in the UK. They describe it as small but perfectly formed, of course nestling in a wooden section of the Worth Valley. Again, it's a request stop, 2 miles from Keighley, and if you want to board or leave the train here, you'll need to tell one of the train guards. They can instruct the driver to stop. Now, of course, most other stops of this size on the British railway system are called halts. Damon's qualified for the title of station because it has its own station master's house and in years gone by sidings that served an adjacent mill. I went there many, many years ago when I was an undergraduate because I had been watching the TV show Born and Bred, 2002 to 2005. It was a show set in the 1950s. It was a drama series about life in a fictional Lancashire village. Of course, the station is in Yorkshire. The main focus of the series was two doctors, father and son, who run a little cottage hospital that becomes part of the new National Health Service, so the NHS, which I covered in the episode N is for NHS. But Born and Bred was just a nice, kind of a chocolate boxy drama, very nice. And as I say, Damon's was the station used, so I couldn't resist going along and at least just stepping out on it for a moment. I didn't know the area very, very well, so I hesitated to step out and then just be left there. So I think I hopped back on. Now I know that there's loads of really nice hiking routes around there, so at some point I shall go again, share photos on my Instagram. Fleming never dies. Anyway, I took the steam train to Haworth fairly recently this summer. I went there because I wanted to go to Haworth, and it was just a good way to get there for their 1940s weekend. I went dressed simply as myself in a double-breasted blazer, nice trousers, tie, and so on. I was stopped by quite a few people wanting pictures of me in costume. Just the same thing I wear to work. Anyway, I've also been recently, as I just wanted to take my wife on the steam train and show her the joys of it really is a gorgeous view from the steam train. And then we watched The Railway Children. Some of the scenes are set in Haworth as well. I think the family doctor up in there lives in Haworth at the Bronte House, funnily enough. Anyway, that is all I have to say about The Railway Children. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed the sections of the book I read out. I hope you enjoyed the poems I read out. I have thoroughly enjoyed researching this, and if there is one thing I'd recommend you look up, it is The Dreyfus Affair. There's plenty of YouTube videos, plenty of interesting web articles. That is my recommended rabbit hole, and if you enjoy it, let me know. You can message me at Instagram, Fleming Never Dies. You can email me, albionneverdies@gmail.com. Please do keep listening and keep telling me what you like, because if you tell me what I like, tell me what you like out of it. Thank you very much. Goodbye.